South Africa's 2024 national election was not simply another political contest, it was a thunderclap. For 30 years after the end of apartheid, the African National Congress, or ANC, stood like a giant over South African politics. It was the party of Nelson Mandela, liberation, sacrifice, and democracy's birth. For many voters, the ANC was not just a political organization, it was a memory, a family inheritance, a flag carried through decades of struggle. But by 2024, that flag had become heavy with disappointment. The election exposed a country wrestling with a painful question. What happens when the party that helped free a nation becomes associated with corruption, unemployment, blackouts, crime, and broken promises? The phrase "South Africa's corrupt election in 2024" can be misleading if it means that the voting process itself was conclusively proven to be stolen. The better argument is more complicated and more interesting. The election was not officially judged by major observers to be fraudulent, but it unfolded in a political landscape soaked in corruption scandals, institutional distrust, misinformation, factional warfare, and public anger. In other words, the ballot box may have functioned, but the house around it was badly cracked. On May 29, 2024, South Africans voted in national and provincial elections that changed the country's political story. The ANC fell below 50% of the national vote for the first time since 1994. This was historic. For 3 decades, the ANC had won every national election outright. Suddenly, it could no longer govern alone. The party that once seemed politically untouchable now had to negotiate, compromise, and share power. The result produced a new political era, coalition politics at the national level. It also produced a storm of accusations, especially from former President Jacob Zuma's MK Party, known as the MK Party. Zuma's party claimed serious irregularities and sought legal routes to challenge the outcome. Yet major observer missions described the election as peaceful and credible. This tension is the heart of the story. The 2024 election was both a democratic breakthrough and a mirror reflecting South Africa's deep crisis of trust. To understand why the 2024 election felt so dramatic, one must return to 1994. That year, South Africa held its first democratic election after apartheid. Long lines stretched across the country as black South Africans, many voting for the first time, helped choose Nelson Mandela as president. The ANC's victory was not merely electoral, it was moral. The party represented liberation from a brutal racial order. For years, that liberation legacy gave the ANC enormous political strength. Many voters saw supporting the ANC as a way of honoring the struggle. But memory, no matter how powerful, cannot repair potholes, keep electricity running, create jobs, or stop corruption. Over time, the romance of liberation collided with the frustration of daily life. By 2024, South Africa faced severe problems: high unemployment, inequality, electricity shortages, failing infrastructure, crime, and corruption scandals. The country's democracy remained vibrant in many ways, with active courts, media, civil society, and opposition parties. Yet many citizens felt betrayed. The promise of 1994 had not disappeared, but it had become harder to see through the smoke of burning substations, political scandals, and empty wallets. The ANC's decline did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of accumulating frustration. The presidency of Jacob Zuma, from 2009 to 2018, became especially associated with state capture, a term used to describe the alleged takeover of public institutions and contracts by politically connected interests. Cyril Ramaphosa later came to power promising renewal, reform, and clean governance. But even under Ramaphosa, the ANC struggled to convince voters that it had fully broken with its corrupt past. Thus, the 2024 election was not just about parties and percentages. It was about memory versus performance. The ANC asked voters to remember the struggle. Many voters responded by pointing to the present. The 2024 election had a cast worthy of a political drama. At center stage stood the ANC, wounded but still powerful. Its leader, President Cyril Ramaphosa, presented himself as a reformer trying to clean up a party with a troubled reputation. Ramaphosa's calm, businesslike style contrasted sharply with the turbulence surrounding former President Jacob Zuma, but Ramaphosa also carried his own political baggage, including controversy over the Fala farm scandal. Then came the Democratic Alliance, or DA, South Africa's largest opposition party. The DA campaigned on clean governance, economic management, and institutional competence. Its critics accused it of being too closely associated with white and middle-class interests, but its supporters argued that it had a stronger record of service delivery in places it governed, especially the Western Cape. The Economic Freedom Fighters, or EFF, led by Julius Malema, brought revolutionary energy and fiery rhetoric. The EFF called for land expropriation, nationalization, and radical economic transformation. Its message appealed to voters angry about inequality and the slow pace of economic change. But the most disruptive newcomer was the MK Party, backed by Jacob Zuma. The party's rise was explosive, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. Zuma, once the ANC's own president, became its most dangerous enemy. His new political vehicle drew support from voters who felt alienated from the ANC under Ramaphosa, as well as those loyal to Zuma personally. MK's emergence split the ANC's traditional base and reshaped the election. In entertainment terms, the ANC entered the election as the aging champion, the DA as the disciplined challenger, the EFF as the street-fighting radical, and MK as the shocking plot twist. When the votes were counted, the twist mattered. The official results were seismic. The ANC won the largest share of the vote but lost its parliamentary majority. The DA came second. The MK Party surged into third place, and the EFF followed behind. The ANC's fall below 50% meant that South Africa had entered coalition territory nationally for the first time in the democratic era. This was not a minor dip, it was a political earthquake. For years, analysts had predicted that the ANC might eventually lose its majority. In 2024, eventually became now. The election forced the ANC to negotiate a government of national unity with other parties, including the DA. Ramaphosa was re-elected president, but he no longer governed from the same position of dominance. The low turnout also mattered. Voter turnout was officially reported at under 60%, a sign that many South Africans were either disillusioned, disengaged, or unconvinced that voting would meaningfully improve their lives. A democracy can survive low turnout, but low participation is a warning light on the dashboard. It suggests that citizens may still value democracy in theory while doubting politics in practice. The election therefore produced two stories at once. The first was a success story. Power shifted peacefully, the ruling party lost support without cancelling the process, and coalition government became necessary. The second was a warning story. Public trust had deteriorated so badly that even a credible process could be greeted with suspicion. Calling the 2024 election corrupt requires precision. There is a difference between a corrupt election process and an election shaped by a corrupt political environment. The available evidence supports the second claim more strongly than the first. A corrupt election process would mean systematic ballot stuffing, vote manipulation, intimidation so severe that voters could not freely choose, or official fraud sufficient to change the result. Major observer groups did not conclude that this happened in South Africa's 2024 election. Instead, they described the election as peaceful, transparent, free, and credible. However, a corrupt political environment is broader. It includes years of misuse of public money, patronage networks, political scandals, weakened institutions, misinformation, and public distrust. South Africa's 2024 election clearly took place in that kind of environment. Voters were not simply choosing between manifestos. They were judging decades of governance, corruption allegations, scandals, and unmet promises. This is why the election can be called corruption-haunted. Corruption was not merely a campaign issue, it was part of the atmosphere. It shaped how voters interpreted everything. A delayed result, a misplaced ballot box, a viral video, or a technical problem could quickly become proof, in some minds, of a larger conspiracy. In a high-trust society, people may see administrative problems as mistakes. In a low-trust society, they see them as evidence. South Africa's 2024 election shows that democratic legitimacy depends on more than counting votes accurately. It depends on whether citizens believe institutions are honest. Once trust erodes, even a well-run election can feel suspicious. Jacob Zuma's role in the 2024 election was extraordinary. Once the ANC's president, Zuma became the face of the MK Party and helped deliver a major blow to his former political home. His support was especially strong in KwaZulu-Natal, where he remained a powerful figure. After the election, the MK Party rejected the results and alleged serious irregularities. It sought to challenge the outcome in court and asked for the results to be set aside or the election rerun. These claims gave voice to supporters who believed the system had treated MK unfairly. But allegations are not the same as proof. Election challenges require evidence strong enough to convince legal institutions, not only political audiences. The MK Party's rejection of the outcome also revealed something larger: the personalization of political trust. For some voters, Zuma himself was more trusted than the institutions declaring the results. This is dangerous terrain for any democracy. When loyalty to a leader becomes stronger than confidence in neutral institutions, every loss can be framed as theft. Yet MK's rise was not only about grievance. It reflected real political dissatisfaction. Many voters who supported MK were not hallucinating their frustrations. They lived with poverty, unemployment, poor services, and anger toward the ANC. MK turned that anger into political power. Its fraud allegations should be evaluated carefully, but its electoral support should not be dismissed as meaningless. It represented a major rebellion within the liberation movement's old support base. Modern elections are not fought only at voting stations. They are fought on phones, in WhatsApp groups, on TikTok, Facebook, X, YouTube, and in the fast-moving court of public opinion. South Africa's 2024 election was no exception. One viral claim involved footage said to show boxes of uncounted ballots in KwaZulu-Natal. Such images are powerful because they appear simple. A box is visual, a rumor is emotional, a caption can turn an ordinary logistical scene into a national scandal. Fact-checkers later reported that the ballot boxes in question had been accounted for, but corrections rarely travel as quickly as outrage. This is one of the great problems of election misinformation. It does not need to prove fraud, it only needs to plant doubt. A video clip stripped of context can make official explanations look suspicious. By the time a fact check appears, thousands or millions may have already absorbed the emotional message. Something is wrong. In a country where many citizens already believe elites are corrupt, misinformation finds fertile ground. It does not fall on dry pavement, it falls on soil already watered by years of scandal. That is why electoral trust cannot be repaired only during election week. It must be built over years through clean governance, transparency, accountability, and public service delivery. The ANC's 2024 defeat was not simply the result of opposition brilliance, it was also the result of self-inflicted wounds. Corruption scandals damaged the party's moral authority. The state capture era under Zuma left deep scars. Ramaphosa's reform agenda did not fully erase them. Many South Africans continued to see the ANC as a party that had allowed politically connected elites to benefit while ordinary people struggled. Corruption is not only about stolen money, it is about stolen possibility. When public funds are misused, schools do not improve, hospitals lack supplies, roads deteriorate, businesses suffer, and young people lose hope. In that sense, corruption becomes a daily experience. It is felt in darkness during power cuts, in long unemployment lines, in unsafe neighborhoods, and in public offices where service is slow or non-existent. By 2024, many voters had grown tired of excuses. The ANC could point to apartheid's long shadow, global economic pressures, and the complexity of governing a deeply unequal society. These factors are real, but voters also had the right to ask what the ruling party had done with 30 years of power. The election result was therefore a public audit. The voters did what auditors do, they examined the record and marked down the institution. The ANC did not collapse, but it was humbled. It remained the largest party, yet the myth of permanent ANC dominance was broken. Election observer missions matter because they provide an external assessment of whether the process met democratic standards. In 2024, regional and international observers generally described South Africa's election as peaceful, transparent, free, and credible. This does not mean the election was perfect. No large election is perfect. There can be late openings, logistical problems, administrative errors, isolated disputes, and voter frustrations. The key question is whether such problems were widespread and serious enough to undermine the overall result. The observer conclusion was important because it pushed back against claims that the entire election was illegitimate. South Africa's institutions also had mechanisms for objections and legal challenges. Parties could raise disputes, approach courts, and demand review. That institutional pathway matters. In a democracy, losing parties have the right to challenge results, but they also carry the responsibility to provide evidence. The courts, the IC, observers, media, and civil society all formed part of the credibility ecosystem. When these institutions function, they help prevent political conflict from spilling into violence. This was especially important because South Africa had recent memories of unrest, including the deadly turmoil after Zuma's imprisonment in 2021. Any large-scale claim that an election was stolen carried serious risks. The 2024 election therefore tested not only the IEC, but the maturity of South Africa's democratic culture. Could the country handle a historic political shift without falling apart? The answer, cautiously, was yes. Once the ANC lost its majority, the next drama began. Who would govern? South Africa's parliamentary system meant that parties had to negotiate. The ANC eventually formed a government of national unity that included the DA and other parties. This was remarkable. The ANC and DA had long been fierce rivals, with different histories, voter bases, and policy instincts. Yet the election forced them into the same governing arrangement. This coalition was both promising and risky. On the promising side, it created an opportunity for accountability. A dominant party that must share power may be less able to ignore criticism. Coalition partners can demand reforms, transparency, and better performance. Investors and some middle-class voters saw the ANC-DA arrangement as a stabilizing move. On the risky side, coalition politics can be messy. Parties may disagree over economic policy, land reform, public services, foreign policy, and the role of the state. Supporters may feel betrayed if their party compromises too much. Smaller parties may use their leverage to extract concessions. The government may become more accountable, or it may become more fragile. Still, the coalition era marked a major democratic milestone. For the first time since apartheid, South Africa's national government had to be built through negotiation rather than ANC dominance. That alone made 2024 a turning point. The simplest answer is this. Based on major observer conclusions and available public evidence, South Africa's 2024 election was not proven to have been stolen. The more nuanced answer is that many South Africans were ready to believe it might have been, because the political system had already lost credibility in their eyes. This distinction matters. Democracies can be damaged in two opposite ways. One way is through actual fraud. Another way is through unsupported fraud claims that convince citizens to reject legitimate results. Both are dangerous. If fraud occurs and is ignored, democracy becomes fake. If fraud is alleged without sufficient evidence and widely believed, democracy becomes unstable. The responsible position is to demand evidence for claims of electoral theft, while also taking public distrust seriously. South Africans who worry about corruption are not irrational. The country has suffered real corruption scandals. But anger at corruption does not automatically prove ballot fraud. The 2024 election should therefore be studied as a case of democratic stress. The official process held, but trust was fragile. The institutions worked, but many citizens doubted them. The ruling party accepted a reduced mandate, but some opponents rejected the result. The election was credible, yet credibility itself was contested. In the end, the most powerful anti-corruption force in 2024 was not a court, a commission, or a speech. It was the voter. South Africans used the ballot to punish the ANC. They did not remove it from power entirely, but they removed its automatic majority. That was a dramatic act of democratic accountability. The voters delivered a complicated message. We remember the past, but we are judging the present. They did not all choose the same alternative. Some chose the DA, some chose MK, some chose the EFF, some stayed home. But collectively, they ended the ANC's era of single-party dominance. That is why the 2024 election should not be remembered only as a story of corruption. It should also be remembered as a story of consequences. The ANC's liberation history did not shield it from voter punishment forever. Corruption, poor governance, and frustration finally broke through the emotional bond that had kept many voters loyal. This is democracy's sharp edge. It does not always produce clean heroes and villains. Sometimes it produces coalitions, contradictions, and uncomfortable compromises. But it gives citizens a peaceful weapon, the vote. South Africa's 2024 election was not best understood as a simple stolen election story. It was a story about a democracy strong enough to humble its ruling party, but wounded enough that many citizens suspected the worst. The election process was broadly judged credible by major observers, but the political environment was burdened by years of corruption, scandal, inequality, and institutional distrust. The ANC's loss of its majority marked the end of an era. The rise of MK showed the power of factional anger and personal loyalty. The DA's role in the government of national unity showed the arrival of national coalition politics. The F's continued presence showed that radical economic frustration remained alive. And the voters showed that liberation history, while powerful, is not a lifetime guarantee. If there is one lesson from South Africa's 2024 election, it is this: corruption does not have to steal ballots to change an election. It can steal trust first. Once trust is gone, every ballot box looks suspicious, every delay looks deliberate, and every loser can claim betrayal. The challenge for South Africa after 2024 is not only to run credible elections. It is to build a government credible enough that citizens believe the results when those elections are over. South Africa's democracy did not die in 2024. In some ways, it matured. But it matured the hard way, through disappointment, accusation, coalition bargaining, and the fall of a political giant. The ballot box worked, but it delivered a warning. The people had not given up on democracy. They had given notice to those who abused it. Think this story was shocking? The deeper you dig, the darker it gets. Watch our investigative series exposing the rise and collapse of powerful political empires. Hit subscribe to Corrupt Roots and tell us in the comments, what hidden trail of corruption should we uncover next?